Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You'll also find me at alanwattsentientsentinel.eu on June the 14th, 2007. Yesterday I watched the more improved chemtrails. I don't know what mark, if it's 3 or 4 they're using, which are a pale blue, still different from the sky. You can see the difference going right across the sky. The real polymer type, it's almost like looking through a polythene, a clear polythene. That's the kind of haze it causes. Then the heat builds up throughout the day, and come about 1 or 2 p.m. in the afternoon, in the sun, it hit about 116 degrees Fahrenheit. In the shade, it was still in the 90s. This is the new norm, which we can see being caused, if we bother to look up, right above our heads. The tiny particles being sprayed in the sky are like billions and trillions of mirrors which reflect the light back and forth towards each other rather than let it come straight through, get absorbed into the earth, and the other gets reflected back out, eventually going out into space. This stuff is keeping it in and building up the heat, and many people have been watching this for the last almost 10 years. Cause the problem, tell the public who to blame, which is themselves, and come forth with the new totalitarian solution of a new way of living, where, my goodness, you can't manage yourself, you're just irresponsible, and we'll have to do it for you, to save you all, of course. And on we go with the agenda. The agenda which was written about long ago. The world, if you realize the world has been fooled in all countries, all nations, in all times. Someone born into today's society, it takes things for granted. Every generation does. They think whatever exists in their time must have evolved naturally. It's there. That's why they have no problem using cell phones and frying their brains, or spending most of their day glued to a video game where you hear these little sounds, beep, 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 and whoop, 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 and bang, bang, bang. They think it's normal because it's designed really for them. And just as your brain frequencies alter as you get older, these things are geared towards their frequencies. They become addictive. They're being trained to interface step by step into a virtual, zombied, artificial world. In a sense, almost, not quite the same, but almost the same as this one, in that the reality indoctrinated into the present people in previous generations still could be broken through by the occasional individual. The virtual world they'll be into shortly will be to them indistinguishable between a real world and anything else. That's all they'll know, in fact. I've said before that when you go into all ages and you realize the import of religion, how it worked, and knowing that ancient priesthoods right up to the present studied every other science, astronomy and physics and so on, and yet to the public they gave taboos and superstitions and deities which watched them all the time and knew their thoughts In other words, they made the people self-police themselves, including their own thoughts. A form of mind imprisonment. But yet, even with all the reinforcement and the social condemnation for those who would break free, it could be broken out of more easily. A virtual world is to be designed, and it's already designed, in fact, it's all waiting to go, so that you'll be born into it eventually, after one generation accepts it and can come in and out of it, thinking they're still in charge. The next generation, or maybe the third generation, will be born into it. That's all they'll know. And they will not have the chance or the opportunity or the clues, perhaps, to help them break free. There'll be an energy source. In the Matrix movie, when Neo asks what was the purpose of keeping them in this physical stasis with the tubes going in for their entire lives, and Morpheus shows them a battery. In a sense, we are batteries, we're energy sources. If you take that all economy, all things come from humans, things that we use, that is, comes from the human, especially in this system, things which are artificial are made by humans. When you go deeper, you find that only about 10 to 15% of the human brain is used by the average individual. In the parietal lobe, another side there, you have a silent area. 90% of your brain is classed as silent. In other words, they claim they don't know what it's for. However, it can be opened up scientifically and utilized. We are the most efficient computers in existence. We last longer too. Not only are we efficient, we can be reprogrammed and upgraded. You wouldn't just be a battery in the virtual world, you'd also be a computer which others can utilize, the 90% which you're not using for bodily functions and daily life. That will be utilized by the top. You could think yourself skiing on the Alps in a virtual world while you lay in a chamber. And at the same time, someone's tapping your brain and using it. A remote computer. What I'm telling you isn't guesswork. This has all been discussed at very high levels long ago. There's nothing that happens in society on this kind of scale that isn't planned and authorized, tried and tested, before the public are even given a whiff of it coming. All mainstream news is given out by only a couple of sources, really, to all media. So you have your regular news, all funneled from a pyramid or a capstone at the top, down to the lesser ones, which you're more familiar with. In that way, you can keep control of what people are thinking, discussing, being programmed daily about. The same goes for the specialized foundations, which specialize in their particular field. So the Club of Rome is planning, always planning way ahead, generations ahead of the next step and the next step of society as they guide them through. They then give their ideas to lower think tanks which specialize in each part of this new idea, and find ways to implement it. And it goes all the way down, and then it's put out to the media through a couple of mainstream news wires, as they call them. The same goes for science information. All the television science shows, the major magazines, are given handouts, in other words, from the top one, which comes up with the next part of the agenda in a scientific fashion, generally from the futurist society, with its own CEO. That's how you keep the programming working and directed. Not difficult at all when you understand it. Not magical. Meanwhile, you have all the other agencies which are working on the immediate future of the next step and the next step and the next step. That's how it's planned. It's a huge, huge business plan on a world scale, discussed even before they created the League of Nations. Never mind its phoenix-like transformation into the United Nations. Peace to them is absence of all opposition to their plans. Peace is when every mind is conquered and owned by a small, dominant minority at the top. Godhood cannot be declared openly if one knee refuses to bow. Social approval and social disapproval is fostered amongst the peoples as a reprogrammed to what to like, what not to like, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Just social approval and disapproval. Therefore, one day, someone will light up a cigarette in the street 100 yards from anybody, and he'll probably get shot on sight. And the public will cheer because they're all brainwashed. Meanwhile, they think nothing wrong of government and tax-funded projects teaching children in junior school how to safely inject heroin into their systems. As was shown on CBC some years back, when a British Columbia board authorized this to be taught to youngsters with the excuses it was better to have them doing it safely because they knew they'd just go ahead and do it when they got older. So teach them while they're young how to inject safely. And the public don't get ticked off about that. But with enough Pavlovian conditioning, you can have them having paroxysms of choking when they see someone light a cigarette up a couple of 100 yards away. That's the power of indoctrination. Most people have no real thoughts of their own. They're programmed through repetition, behavior modification, and they don't know it. This is one of the techniques that Brzezinski talked about, a technique to be used on the public, about which they'd be completely unaware. Lord Bertrand Russell said the same thing in his book, The Impact of Science on Society. And further back, Blavatsky even mentioned it in one of her later writings in the 1800s. What I'm saying is that most people are 95% ready. They're there towards the acceptance of a virtual world. I don't know what the present stats are of how much television a child or an adult watches per day now. I know it was phenomenal even 10 years ago. And with every year, someone else is born who's going to be weaned on television. with a multitude of stations, all saying the same things, mind you, and giving them their thoughts, their likes or dislikes, their conditioning, and never knowing. They're 95% there, living in an electronic reality. It's not a far step to take them to the next 5%, especially when they truly will believe that they'll be in charge of their own person. And that's the trick, because already at this stage they're not in charge of their own person. They don't even know really who they are. They're a conglomerate of conditioned and indoctrinated responses. At one time, rebellions would take place, not in the so distant past, when intrusion caused by government into the individual's lives went to a certain level. It's a natural instinct to retain the right to your own thoughts, your own ideas, personal information. There was a natural survival mechanism which showed itself in an indignancy when someone tried to force you to open your thought bank. Because in there, everything that is you is contained. It's personal. You can't get more personal than that. Yet, with some conditioning, in about 30 years, beginning with the use of credit cards, dishing out personal information to cashiers and people at the tills, people have gradually given up the idea of having personal, private information. That was part of the conditioning process towards what's coming. Those who still retain the survival mechanism sometimes phone me up because they're freaking out at the lack of response as governments and governmental agencies declare openly their intent to go further into the total information network where nothing is kept private. Now that includes, for those who are awake, that includes what you think about on a daily basis. Are your thoughts correct? Are they politically incorrect? Are they socially incorrect? Remembering that society and its norms are altered generation by generation. If we take 70 years or even 35 years, they're altered all the time. It's whatever is promoted from the top becomes the norm. They've had trial balloons put out there in newspapers, in the States especially, where it's been suggested by the front men in government that everyone be tested for psychological correctness. Thought think, right think and wrong think, as Orwell would have put it. And there's no big outcry about it in a public which will even blurt out their social insurance numbers. Not that they should have them in the first place. I mean, that was part of the whole labeling process of ownership. The SIN number. They'll blurt it out to telemarketers that call them up on the phone. I've heard people take calls and begin to automatically answer questions and start telling these people who say they're from poll taking or whatever they tell you, they blurt it out to this voice on the other end of the phone. It could be a computer for all they know. They don't even care. They don't even think. They just do it. Conditioned responses. It's odd how the norms change, isn't it? This is something that their grandparents or great-grandparents would have hauled them off for observation for just blurting it out to some anonymous caller. That's now normal to do so. I've even heard people, and I'm sure you have too, who say, well, I've nothing to hide. I don't mind. I'm good. I'm a good citizen. Always updating what is good for the period they're talking about, because it keeps changing. You're listening to controlled people. You listen to completely conditioned people. They're not really people anymore. They're automatic conditioned responses. That's what's really scary to those who are awake and trying to wake up others. I keep telling them, you cannot wake up people who haven't tried to wake up themselves. It's a waste of energy. Not only that, those in slumber will fight you off. You'll become their enemy. The teat they're sucking on is television, generally. And they're talking head at 6 o'clock on news time is their boss, their master. What would you know? You're not on television. An old movie with Robert Duvall, I think it was THX something, followed by a number, a futuristic movie to do with a totalitarian type of society where everyone was drugged and programmed, indoctrinated, and worked really as slaves with functions. Showed when Duvall was trying to get off the drugs to think, and the robot police came in saying, we're here to help you, as they hit him with batons. The double think, double speak was all through the movie. And in one scene, you see scientists observing him in a kind of padded cell as he's being tortured and shocked by these robocops. And they're quite calmly talking about their daily events and back to work and back to daily events and what they're doing and back to the work. These technocrats, the types that Brzezinski said would be the eventual upper bureaucracy. They'll run the system, these technocrats. Even talking about Duvall's condition, and they make him have spasms, almost seizures, by sending out signals to different parts of his body, remotely of course, because you don't have to touch a body today. You haven't for a long time. They know the language coding of the frequencies of different neurons to different types of muscles, etc. They can make you even hear a voice speaking from your knee if they wanted to. At least that's how it would appear to you. They've had that for a long time, because at the higher level of science, that which is not published to the public, to a very naive public that forget during the Cold War all the con games and secrecy that was going on, they knew then that everything given to the public, at least they knew then, was really obsolete. Because the military-industrial complex would never give its latest anything or projects to the public. It hasn't changed. The trick is to make you think you're always on the cutting edge, and then you're really naive. You'll never figure out just far ahead they actually are. And the magic they will play on you will be just that. It's just higher science, which you will think is magical or impossible, because they haven't got that kind of science yet. I read the magazines, don't I? That's part of it. So why the rush towards a chip in the brain? Well, you're dealing here with totalitarianism, remember. where every possible base must be covered, all the ifs, all the little ifs. To be a god, you got to have everybody totally under control, and the only way they can be sure that everyone is under is to ultimately chip them. Yes, all military weaponry is designed to work on the vast majority of people, but since it's cost effective, they don't go for everyone. That's why they have to get ultimately everyone chipped, because the regular techniques don't work on the complete population. On most they will. And they can make you hear voices at any distance and tap into frequencies. But you see, it's wonderful that we're not all exactly the same. That's why some people can take an aspirin and have a headache caused by the aspirin. Or someone can take a Valium and become hyper. We're not all the same. There are differences, subtle differences. Yet medicine still tries to treat you all as though you were all the same. And when you respond differently, you're put down as an anomaly or an occasional side effect in some people. The herbal industry is just the same. They try and treat everyone as though they were the same. We're not. Business cannot be honest, you see, because it is business. In fact, nothing in a monetary system could ever be honest. When you have a tiered ranking system of income, and everyone has the terrible fear of poverty, it creates an inhumane system. Even the communists found that out in the Soviet system around the 1950s, when governments over there in the Soviet bloc started to give incentives to the bureaucracy. Then the bureaucracies had to gouge people at the bottom for more. That was the beginning of their downfall. It was really rigged from the beginning, because 200 families moved into the Soviet Union at the beginning, and they've run it ever since. George Orwell painted a picture of a world always at war with something, because war was essential to keep the system going in power. Without war or threats, you don't really need all these government services, as they call them, which are authorities now. They can't give you the reasons to tax, and because they really fill their pockets with tax money. It goes to the big corporations through grants to developing countries, where the big international boys simply set up a base, grab your tax money, and pass it somewhere else around the world. This is the old con game from the Overseas Economic Development Fund, which every country that signed on to the UN pays into. We'll have a department of that in government. They take your tax money, they claim to put it to developing countries, but in reality the big boys move in because they're told where it's going to go, and they get the grants. That's how it works. The boys help out the boys worldwide. Everybody who's in the left wing in your government and who's in on the game tries to get a job in the Overseas Economic Development Corporation. Shell corporations, we call them, in British democratic countries, the Commonwealth countries. A strange phenomena where we know they're shareholders, but the government refuses to tell you who the shareholders are, except that the public also fund it. We live in a world of what would otherwise be called corruption. The corruption is the norm, and the big cons at the top, that squander your money, which they collect under warlike guises from you to save you from something, are pocketed by the big boys at the top. They'll make the mafia look like choir boys. And that is the norm. That's the normal. In the 1970s, the brainwashing at that time, with the hullabaloo and documentary specials on all televisions worldwide, was acid rain and dying lakes everywhere. And that brought out tax money into special funds to combat acid rain. I guess they were going to throw the money into the sky, maybe. Maybe that's what was... Because money always seems to cure things, according to the propaganda, doesn't it? Maybe they just drop billions of dollars all over the sky, and it would make the lakes turn pristine once more. Well, that hullabaloo died away, you'll notice, without really any follow-up. It had worked at the time, it got the tax money in, new parts of government, new bureaucracies sprung up. And they moved on from there. And people have no memory in perpetual war because we're always given another threat to worry about. We go from one to the next until it becomes a blur. But it's always the same story. Now it's the environment and global warming and greenhouse gases. The world is a big greenhouse, people. Always was. But money and massive taxation from all different new areas will cure it, you'll find. It'll cure it just like that. Just like the acid rain was all forgotten about. And the dying lakes everywhere. Yeah. Meanwhile, they're still pulling out the giant muskies in the lakes in Canada. By the statistics in the 70s, everything would be dead everywhere. Everywhere. Yeah. In the 70s, late 70s, everyone was going to be dead with AIDS. Everyone. Mm-hmm. And massive funding went into all that. Well, that's quieting down a bit, isn't it? 4 or 5 years ago, it was West Nile virus. West Nile virus was going to wipe us out. And crows were dying. Of course, they were dying because we're eating the shoots from the modified crops, as all crows do. That's why you have scarecrows in fields. They're in there for the young shoots. But no, West Nile virus would wipe us all out. Now that's gone. Now it's an avian flu that's going to get us. See, the imagination is wonderful. They employ imaginative people called marketers. They study that they're trained in marketing, the psychology of persuasion, and they have good imaginations. I'm sure they're working on the next century's terror tactics, if we still have any sentient people left to brainwash. Now they've added on purchasing taxes on televisions and computers, like the same con they did with the rubber tires. You paid extra for disposal fees when you bought the tire new, even though when you took it back to get disposed of, you paid again. No one complains. We're used to it now. Many people will love their slavery, their new slavery, the new, more sophisticated form of slavery that Charles Galton Darwin called it in his book, The Next Million Years, of how the elite were going to control the next million years. Quite the boast, isn't it? Of course, the Darwinian family only married into one other family because they had specialized selective breeding with the Wedgwood family that owns all the pottery, nice pottery with the vases, the blue vases and the white Greek figures on it. But I think that pottery combined with the dare to win has made them a little potty. If they think they will control the next million years. Con games never cease. So yeah, you'll pay $45, I think, to start with. That's like, once they get on the books, you see it always expands. Like, terrorism now is defined as anything at all that isn't authorized, or not complying with the latest authorizations, or even forgetting to comply about the authorizations because it keeps changing so quickly, you see. Eventually, not paying your parking fees will come under terrorism, financial terrorism, and they do have a department now of financial terrorism. Neologisms, new definitions as well of words, always changing the meanings of words with every major republication of dictionaries. In all ages, there have been those who understand naturally. Coexisting with those who've been taught a certain amount to understand through various mystery schools. But really, they're taught all they need to know to run the system. Those who understand naturally have often pondered down through the ages why they do understand and why they see through. And therefore, in all holy books, in all ages, in all countries, and with accompanying mythologies, they have story dialogues where some character in the story meets the deity or a bunch of deities and debates as to why the world should be wiped clean of humanity. They also debate why the world and humanity should be saved. It's a nice way to put it in a dialogue form when someone can debate with the deity a point of view and maybe even sway the deity's mind. They're rather cute little stories. Yet, behind it all is a profound truth. It's always easier to make the wrong decisions, to give in to all the temptations, which end up hurting us all in the long run, and personally too. It's always easier to take the wrong route. The higher route means climbing and exhausting yourself, and yet you know ultimately it's the right thing to do and saves you a lot of grief in the long run. We have the chance to be much, much more than we are, to be fully human, not in the sense of exploitation of anything or anyone else. Or we have the choice to be tyrants ourselves in a psychopathic-led society. You have a culture which they always give the people below, the non-psychopaths. Yet this culture also contains the psychopathic element. That's why it's never humane. The people behave like psychopaths, but they know they're doing wrong. To become very successful, you'll either prostitute yourself or your mind or your convictions, or destroy others on the way up. That's called success, which is psychopathic. It doesn't matter if it's someone in priestly clothing from any nation or culture, or someone in a business suit at the United Nations. The most evil deeds are done by claiming the greatest concern for others while they fill their pockets from the blood they cause to be shed to get their agendas through. I have no doubt there are more scandals than just the oil for food scam that was going on at the United Nations. There'll be far, far more scams going on. We already know there are, even to do with prostitution and child prostitution in the countries they liberate. Double speak for invasion, isn't it? You can go anywhere across the Middle East where the United Nations is supposedly dumping all this food, and you'll find caravans going through deserts with the supplies on their back because they've paid someone on the side for the stuff which they'll sell expensively somewhere else. In the old days, they had at least some documentaries on that. You don't see it today because the UN has to be polished up and be squeaky clean, at least to the public's imagination. And count the little segments that make up the logo for the UN, the grid, the world grid. Count them. Down through the ages, you'll find the most profound truths given out, which are meant to free the occasional individual, will be used to enslave the masses, because the bulk of the populace in all ages prefer ritual and dogma. It takes time and self-examination, obviously, to understand that truths are double-edged. They either free you or slave you. Enslavement is the typical way that people go. It's easier for them to behave as a mass than to try and accept or follow the freedom that comes with understanding. A truth does not have to be confirmed by those round about you if it's a truth you're seeking for yourself. The bulk of the populace have always bounced off their opinions, which are not really theirs, to other people and back to themselves. Then when they all agree about the same things, they accept or think they are normal. And they are within groupthink. It's the unusual person who can go beyond and be content within themselves with the outcomes of their thoughts. It doesn't have to be verified by other people. Whether it's Plato's cave you've been born into, which every generation has, just a different texture on the walls, that's all, for the time period. Different sets of rules, different explanations It's the same cave. And those within the cave will accept quite happily the reasons for everything being the way they are. In ancient times, they used to make big concern over the skull. The skull was the home of thought, the upper room, sitting on the 33 bones of the spinal column. You went into the upper room to think and to share truths. That skull, of course, became a symbol of many of their brotherhoods as they planned their world domination. But truth is always crucified on a place of the skull. Inside your head is where truth is crucified. Henceforth you have a Golgotha. That's what it means. Only you can crucify the truth. And that's why it says, when you do, on our own heads be it. You make the decision yourself. Not a people, but as an individual person. You make that decision. Some of the higher Masons today still use a skull to drink from. The water of life, the truth, symbolically. Other ones use plastic ones now because they're becoming wimps. You have one life to lead here, to lead yourself out of the matrix. When your mind begins to work, it will start speeding up like an express train, and then you have to also control it. You don't go blurting everything you understand to others who are still inside the old program. They'll turn on you and think you crazy. The thought that so much has gone in to creating a fake reality from television and their favorite newscasters and those who give them their documentaries, the thought of all that being planned, being part of a structure of control of their minds is unthinkable to them. That's why mind control does work on such an incredibly vast scale. Don't take it from me. Read it from Brzezinski and others who've been involved in the setting up of the structure, at least the modern part of it. What I've also noticed recently is not so much recently, they always give those who are waking up heroes to follow, generally with something no one else has. Either someone who comes out from within the CIA or within the FBI or ex-FBI or ex-CIA or ex-whatever. Some of them are genuine. The ones who are genuine, we get one interview and they're gone. Other ones go on for years, leading the patriot type round in circles. This also happens with the ones who come out and even disclose some of the aerial spraying or the HARP type projects, and once they come out with profound truths and equipment that they've somehow been given, which was never available to the public, they then come out and tell us how to use equipment to make us more healthy. Again, once more, you're right back to adapting to sciences. Let sciences will be your savior. They'll cure you of everything. and enhance you back to the same agenda. They take you back to the same agenda which the elite have you on. If fire was sweeping around the world, you'd be teaching your children not to put their hands in it. Don't get too close to it. And then they would turn around and tell them the fire will cure us eventually of everything. Their faith is in science. They're right back onto the same agenda. Because people are terrified of death. Anything to do with health can be sold to them. The more fantastic it is, the more they want to believe it. Because they're terrified of something which they do every day, which is to go to sleep. But this time they never wake up. They can't handle their consciousness when they are awake. So they walk around with earphones and cell phones strapped to their ears, or TVs or radios blaring away, because they can't stand their own thoughts. Yet here they are, terrified not to wake up to have those terrified thoughts. Interesting phenomena. Now I'm kept very, very busy here. It's 90 odd degrees now. I'll have to get out and cut wood. I've had people who want to just visit me spontaneously, and I cannot take visitors like that, because one day of a visit will set me back a week or more, and I kid you not. I also have so much mail, most of it I can't get around to. There's too much. I'd like to thank the occasional person who has donated to me. There's not enough. But I thank those who have. And please don't think it discourteous not to sit down and put pen to paper when you see the pile of mail I do get. Lots of letters too. Which is letters, often from teenagers and young people who are going through the incredible journey of madness that they see all around them, some of whom are in distress. You got to help them when you can. But I never get round to the vast majority of mail I have. I do read it, and I do have a pile always put by to reply to, but then I always put a pile next to it very shortly, and it just goes on and on. There are very good people out there. There are people who are really awake, different age groups too, which is a healthy sign. Their one problem is they're isolated from everyone else, and they have to hang in there and become comfortable with themselves. That's the key to it. You don't need confirmation from others. That's me winding down for this talk. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. So from me in this hot, very hot, too hot, sunny day, and Hamish, who's getting a haircut at home here, of course, it's good night, and may your God or your gods go with you.